this presentation is based on my research. I've been working on the implementation of migration and border control policies for the last 10 years. And I will focus today in particular on the research I've conducted on the implementation of visa policy. And so I will really focus on the methodological approach, methodological insights, rather than the findings or results of the research. I will give you some hints at the end about that. First, I'd like to explain a little bit the implementation perspective. So what is migration and border control in practice? Why does it matter? And what kind of questions can be addressed by taking the implementation perspectives? Then I'd like to make some clarifications about methodologies and methods. So what is the difference between methodologies and methods? And then I will really focus on, I will give you an example about research design and how the research design can also affect the questions you ask during your research, and how these questions and the puzzle of your research can evolve because you choose a certain research design. So the implementation perspective is in general, also beyond the migration research, is a perspective that looks at policymaking on the ground, that consider policymaking to be ubiquitous, so that policies are made not just when they are formulated, so when they are written into laws, or when they are written into text, when they are decided at the level of the policy design. But policymaking happens also and especially when policies are put into action. So those who actually put in practice policies that a certain kind of literature calls street-level bureaucrats and street-level organizations can be considered policymakers, because they make decisions about policies, and also because they shape policy outcomes even more than policy design. This means that this stage of the policy process should be and can be researched and studied on its own. I mean, you can't think, or you can study the policy making at the level of design, but it doesn't mean that you have actually insights on how policies turn out. And in the field, in the specific field of migration and borders, the implementation perspective is really important, because the migration studies in general have focused on the question of state capacity to control migration and borders. So one typical question in migration studies is, are states capable of controlling migration and borders, and why they are not capable in case they are not? So this is an important question in this kind of research. And the implementation, because it's the stage of the policy process in which policy outcomes are shaped, is key to address this question about state capacity. So the implementation perspective is typically focuses on welfare policies. So we have a very rich literature on the implementation of welfare policies, but it's also in an expanding field of research in migration studies. So this being said, I like to show how a certain research methodologies and methods, and in particular those I used in my research, can address this question of the implementation. First, I'll make this distinction between methodology and methods, and you'll see when I give you the examples of my own research how these two elements are important, but they are in a way different. So a methodology is really an epistemological stance that follows analytical and theoretical approaches. So if we consider the implementation as a stage of the policy process in itself, so that it's not simply it doesn't really stem from the policy design. We need to focus in a certain way on that stage, and so we can have, in this sense, we can have a methodology that is bottom up. We understand, we look at the implementation to understand policies. So we're not looking at policy on paper to understand the implementation, but we are looking at the implementation to understand the policies. And so this is a stance, an epistemological stance, an analytical and theoretical approach that needs a certain research design. And so here we are using a methodology in this sense. A slightly different thing is a method, in the sense a method is a way to reply to a research question, also a way to test hypotheses. So when it comes to qualitative research can also be positivist, in the sense that we can make hypotheses and use fieldwork to test these hypotheses. This is not really what I will show you, because I use a different method, but just to say that this is also possible. This is a way of using qualitative research. And so we use a certain method to address a certain question, is to test a certain hypothesis. These are ways of using methods. So for instance, what are the determinants of cross-national variation in implementation of EU visa policy? This is the question on which my research has started. So because I have this question, I have this question. So, and I will give you detail about how did I build this question. I choose certain methods which are the observation of the implementation on the ground to reply to this question. So let me get into really the example of my research. Let's take these questions on which I've focused. So, determinants of cross-national variation in the implementation of EU visa policy. So we already see that there is a comparative stance, because we are talking of cross-national variation. We are interested in these determinants of cross-national variation at a specific stage of the policy process, which is the implementation of a specific policy, which is EU visa policy. Questions that follow this one is, how is a European common instrument of migration and border control implemented by national bureaucracies? What does migratory risk actually mean? To what extent do the outcomes of European bordering policy shift? So in the end, who gets in, how and why? Why do these outcomes shift? Obviously, these questions come from academic literature. In which sense? In the sense that visa policy, there is literature understanding visa policy as an instrument of migration and border control, because by issuing visas, the state is deciding who gets in a country, also who gets out. But in this case, we are talking of visas to enter a country. The issuance of visa policy has to do with the assessment of migratory risks. So we want to understand, because we look at the implementation, we want to understand what does migratory risk actually mean in practice. So how is it assessed when policy officers needs to decide upon these applications? To what extent there is a difference between European countries, and why are there these differences? And so we are building a comparative case study. So the strict level implementation of EU visa policy by certain European member states in a same third country. And in this case, in the case I'm presenting here, the European countries are Belgium, France, and Italy, and the third country is Morocco. So let me unpack all this. So another very, very important topic in the methodology is the selection of the case study. So the case study here is a comparative case study. So let's start by focusing on the case. The case is the EU visa policy. So for those who are not familiar with the EU visa policy, the important thing to know is that the EU, or to be more precise, the Schengen area, which is a border-free region made of different EU member states, has a common entry visa. So basically, some nationalities to enter the Schengen area must apply for the Schengen visa. And so there is a common policy. This policy is common because it's regulated by European law. So it's a European law, no nation states law. And this law is hard law. So again, for those who are not familiar with European context, it's important to know that the hard law means that it's legally binding and self-executing law. And these are council regulations. And there are a series of laws. So the list of countries whose nationals must be in possession of a visa, the uniform format for visa, the rules governing the movement of persons across borders, and also the rules, conditions, and procedures for issuing visas. So this is the policy on paper. And this is directly the self-executing binding law for all member states. So this is the common policy on paper. But member states' consulates put that law into action. So here is why the question, why implementation matters, and why the question of comparing different consulates of different states implementing the same policy. We could think of a very similar design for national policies and looking at different localities. So different cities implementing residence permits regulation or other kinds of legislation. So you see the comparative design of a research that addresses the issue of implementation. This is particular because we have different nation states having a common visa policy. And so we ask, I'm asking how the different states actually put this common policy into practice. Again, for the selection of the case study, so now why the EU visa policy? Because there is a puzzle there, a common policy, but different nation states bureaucracies that put it into action. But how do I select the comparison? So the EU member states and the third country. Now there is a reasoning behind. So if my questions were about the visa policy as an instrument of migration and border control, if I'm interested in understanding how the migratory risk is assessed, so what does actually mean on the ground and how this policy shifts, I need to select a country in which this policy is put into action, a country that is a migrant sending country, because in a migrant sending country, the issue of migration control by delivering visas is salient. And also when deciding upon visa applications, the issue of assessing the migratory risk is salient because it's a migrant sending country. So for the European Union, if we look at the statistics, and so I select the cases looking at the statistics of migrants, the nationality of migrants in the EU, we see that Turkish and Moroccans are the largest numbers of largest numbers of immigrants in the EU. So what should I select, Turkey or Morocco? Because I'm asking about the comparative, I have a comparative framework, so I'm asking about different member states in a same third country. I need a country whose nationals are spread in the EU. And this is more the case of Moroccans than Turkish, because Turkish are overrepresented in Germany. So for my question, it makes much more sense to select Morocco. So the highest numbers of immigrants are Turkish or Moroccans. Turkish are overrepresented, in particular in Germany. Moroccans are spread more in European member states. In relatively old immigration state and new immigration state, and in fact, if we look at this table, we will see that Moroccan origin populations are important numbers in France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Spain, and Italy. So old immigration countries and new immigration countries. So within this European countries, so now I need to select the European member states. Within these European member states, I selected France, Belgium, and Italy. And here there are other kinds of ideas that come in for a series of reasons. Okay, Moroccans are the first or the second non-EU nationality of migrants in these countries. And also there is an issue of feasibility in my case, because I speak the languages of these countries, so I can conduct research in these countries, and so I can select these ones instead of others. And again, these three countries allows me to ask these questions in old immigration countries like France and Belgium, and in the new immigration country like Italy. So now the EU consulates. So now we selected the comparative case study for the member states, the third country, Morocco. And so now within Morocco, there's also we will select the consulates in Casablanca. So I want to, again, I'm asking how this policy is put into action. So I need the local consulates, and I will select Casablanca because these three countries have the highest numbers of visa applications are in the consulates in Casablanca for the three countries, although some of these countries have other consulates in Morocco too. And we will have another measure here. These are the rates of non-issued short stay visas out of visas applied for in the three consulates of Belgium, France, and Italy. And we see that among these three countries, there is a huge difference in terms of non-issued short-stay visas. And this, for my question about are there differences in the implementation practices and why there are these differences in implementation practices, so in assessing the migratory risk, in giving practical meaning to the migratory risk. These three cases are actually excellent cases because from the statistics we see quite a huge difference. With the highest refusal rate for Belgium, then Italy, and the lowest France. So all these are criteria that allow me to select this case. So I built my research design by using, by justifying the case selection, by justifying the methodological approach, so the analytical and theoretical approach and the questions I'm asking, so the selection of the case study. I designed my research, but now there's another step in research design, which is the design of the research process. And in this case, it's a qualitative research process based on fieldwork, meaning observations and interviews in these three locations, these three consulates, Consulate of Italy, France, and Belgium in Casablanca. So it's about observing the work of the people who put into action visa policy, meaning those who take decisions on visas. But also interviewing these people to understand also how do they understand their job. There is a difference between what you observe and what people tell you about what they do. There is a difference between what they do and how do they consider, how do they think of what they do. So it's always important to couple these two elements when it's possible. And the in-depth and reliability of data also stem from the position of the ethnographer as a witness. So when you are in an office, I was in these offices, I was basically after a while, part of this office, spending the day with the people working in there, having lunch. You basically are a witness of the processes. And in this case, you obtain answers without questions. And this is why there is such a refined knowledge when you have the opportunity of observe processes in action. And so this is really the position of the ethnographer. Also, I followed the rules of comparison, meaning I did the same kind of fieldwork in the same fieldwork setting. So 3 visa offices, observations of those who take decisions, those who process the application, the managers, the consuls, the head of the office. And sometimes there's also when you have to build this comparison, in the sense that sometimes the structures are different, so you need to but you need to have the same kind of data, to gather the same kind of data in the same settings, and to construct the comparability in case these settings are slightly different. To assess the reliability of data gathered, I also conducted the same fieldwork I went to the same fieldwork setting more than once. So I think a good way of conducting this kind of research is having some fieldwork in some period, like 2 months. You do your research, then you go out, and then you come back after 3 months. Also because there's a lot of information that you gather, and time, which is the key element here for this ethnographic fieldwork. Time is a key element because it allows to build trust with in your rapport with research participants. It allows you to cross-check information. It allows you to gain credibility vis-a-vis the person you are interacting with, and also to develop what I call the sort of prestige capital, which is connected to the issue of credibility. The more you are in the setting, you more understand those social words, and the more you become credible in the eyes of the people you are working with, your research participants. And this, for this, time is key. And this kind of research requires time, especially when you want to observe processes in action. You will see many things. You really need to cross-check information to assess reliability. So it takes time, and especially this issue of build a rapport with the people on the ground. It takes time. And then there is also an issue of access, but this is can be more difficult in consulates or in settings characterized a little bit by secrecy or security, but the issue of access is always complicated. Even if you work with migrants, there's always, so you need a strategy in the beginning to gain access, and sometimes it can be difficult. So I mean, I can develop on this maybe if you have more questions then later on this, but I'll keep it short now. So, but there is an issue, there's always this issue of access as well that must be thought since the beginning. And here I want to make another point, is that when you don't have you are not using fieldwork to test hypotheses, although you have your questions, you are using that method, that is observations, interviews, to reply to your research questions. But you are not, I wasn't in this case using the fieldwork to test hypotheses. I was open to the kind of data I would have gathered, although I had my hypotheses in my mind, I had my explanatory factors in my mind, or I had my ideas, of course, and I had the questions that were guiding my research. But when you are using really a qualitative research in an inductive stance. So here it's really an issue of methodology more than method. You have an inductive approach. You are in that condition of openness to the unanticipated that the sociologist Howard Baker characterized as the epistemological distinctness of qualitative research. So when you are open to the unanticipated, you can gather surprise data, so things you haven't thought about before, precisely because you are not testing hypotheses, but you are simply open to understand what you observe. And so here, this epistemological stance allowed me to also change my research questions in the process of the research, and also to change the puzzle of my research that shifted from the determinants of cross-national variation. So I found cross-national variation in the implementation of this common policy by national consulates. And I found determinants, so I found different factors that can explain these variations. But because I was open to the unanticipated and I was conducting really ethnographic research in the sense that I was there to simply understand those social words, I also found something that I didn't expect, which were similarities among these very different context, and also the processes whereby implementation practice becomes more similar. And so basically my research also became about processes of policy change from below, something I didn't absolutely think in the beginning when I designed my research. And this was something that came inductively from the research on the ground. So this is also a very important point that I mean, you start with questions, obviously. You have ideas in your mind, you have explanatory factor in your mind, you have obviously hypotheses in a certain way, but when you do a really inductive bottom-up kind of research, you will find, it's very likely you will find surprise data and something you didn't think about it before, and your paths or your questions might evolve during the research process. So, okay, I will stop here because I think I used all my time. I'd like you to just to point to this book I published on this topic, in which there is a methodological section, which all this is explained also in more details, and also it gives you more, for those who are interested, it can give insights into the findings, the actual findings of the research, which I didn't really focus on because here really the focus was the methodology. So thank you.